Hey, I'm Jonathan, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about how we had an increase of 711% in net new pipeline from paid. And so it's pretty interesting. There's a whole bunch of things we can talk about because there were a lot of different channels that were involved, but specifically, we're going to be getting into retargeting because retargeting played a huge role in everything that we did for this company, specifically on channels like LinkedIn and Meta. And so there's a couple of things that are really important that we'll kind of really dig into that ultimately led to a lot of these results, which one was making sure we had the proper budget actually allocated from a media plan perspective because audience sizes vary across different retargeting audiences. How we split up the different retargeting audiences into different pieces. And so you can do all sorts of things like 30, 60, 90, 180 day audiences across channels like Meta and LinkedIn. So it's going to be the other big part. The other thing is making sure that we keep in mind that it's not about just nurturing people and converting them with social proof and case studies, but also reminding them again what you actually do and how you do it. And so a lot of the things that we try to do with our clients is make sure there's a good, solid product marketing layer that goes deeper into the product and actually what it does. And so you can map this actually by looking at the buyer's journey. And so what a lot of people will do is they'll say, hey, when someone actually becomes initially aware of my company, there's going to be a handful of questions that they're going to have after they get to your website, right? They may wonder, who do you integrate with? What other customers do you work with? How does it actually work? Show me an example. Things like that. And so there's all sorts of questions that need to be answered to de-risk the investment of time for someone to come in to either do a trial or a demo or whatever it may be. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and some other things. So it'll be a pretty good story. So in terms of how many people were involved, let's see, we had 5 people, I guess, touching the account over the last 2 years. So that's what happened there. In terms of how much money we spent, there's about $65,000 to $100,000, somewhere within that range per month being spent across a variety of channels like Google Ads, Bing, LinkedIn, Meta, or kind of the core channels. Of course, we're going to be focusing predominantly on paid social from a retargeting perspective, but that's generally what like the budget looked like. And then ultimately, I mean, anyone can theoretically implement this, obviously, with the right, experience and skill set. I mean, selfishly, I'd say, it takes an agency like us and a team like we have to ultimately do this type of thing. But, with the right type of effort, digging deep, really understanding the buyer's journey, doing customer research, et cetera, anyone can really get in there and do that with the right experience on the LinkedIn and Meta side.
If that resonates with you, listen along. Also, check out our other episodes. You're listening to TLDR, the B2B SaaS growth podcast brought to you by Spear Growth. The goal of the podcast is to enable you, our listeners, to generate an additional $100,000 in cumulative pipeline by May 2024. To do this, we bring people who have made a real impact in their companies. They cut through the fluff and dive deep into one tactic or strategy of theirs. I'm your host Ishan. Let's generate pipeline.
Hey Jonathan, it's great to have you here. I think a couple of episodes ago we spoke with a couple of other agency owners, and then we had to get you on. I see your content all the time on LinkedIn. Great stuff. I look at the kind of work that you guys do at your agency. Big kudos to you that you're one of the few agencies that as a fellow agency owner, I think you do great work. I would highly recommend working with you guys. So had to get you on board, see what you're doing differently. And I think retargeting is a great topic, which everyone thinks they know. But I think it'll be really fun to discuss the nitty-gritties of it and how the work is really done. Hey man, thank you so much for doing this. Great to have you on the show.
100%, man. Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. So could you, for anyone listening to this, could you give a quick introduction of yourself, and then we can get into the episode?
Yeah, sure. The quick background is started in sales, selling security software to the U.S. government. That led to a number of different sales roles like SDR, AE, sales manager. So I oddly enough have a sales background, and then I got into marketing shortly after, but realized it was actually quite a deadly skill to have some sales background, given that marketing has to be accountable to things like pipeline revenue and all that. So those are things I knew all too well. And then over the last 3 or 4 years, we started a management agency called Omni, where we focus predominantly on trying to drive high-intent demo requests for sales-led companies or trials for PLG-based companies, making sure that ultimately we're accountable towards lagging indicators like pipeline and other things, because it's about quality, not quantity. So
Love that. By the way, I started my career as a sales slash marketing person.
Yeah.
I was given the entire sales training and then thrown into the marketing team. So
It's
that's
crazy.
been
Yeah.
a
It's a great skill set. I mean, ultimately, I mean,
oh
if
yeah.
every marketer could have the opportunity to step into sales shoes for a bit and vice versa, I mean, I know that's not realistic for a lot of people. There's just so much good empathy that can be generated from that. And so yeah, it's nice to kind of have the experience of both sides.
Oh
So,
yeah, I love that. And as founders, we have to know sales.
yeah.
So I
And
think then it just gets polished. Perfect.
so,
So just getting to the retargeting, uh, the entire thing that you did, let's just break it down into pieces so that we can discuss all of them at once. So apart from,
yeah.
let's say there's budgeting, messaging, the way you've built the audiences, what else? Is there anything else that comes to mind that we'll be discussing today?
Yeah, I think the first place that we should really start is really building out a media plan for the various different retargeting campaigns that you start with, right? And I think you know this all too well because you do this a lot as well. And so, you know, when you have different audience sizes, clearly you're not going to need the same levels of budget. And so I think for most people that should be obvious if you're in paid media. If you're not, and listen to this, it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Or how does that work? Or how do I actually determine how much to allocate to each different layer? And so generally speaking, with what we did with this client is we had a 30, 90, and 180 day layer. And so each of those different layers have different audience sizes. Don't ask me what they are right now. Not sure I have that detail, but somewhere around, I think, 5, 10, and 15 or so is probably the general numbers in terms of size. It's 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, somewhere around there. And so that means that what we need to do is we need to look at, number one, what's our goal from a frequency perspective within each of those campaigns? And then next, we need to identify what's our historical CPM? How expensive is it to reach this audience, these people that are actually active that are in them? And so when you have those two variables plus the audience, you can calculate out how much budget you should actually spend in those campaigns. And so that's really the first part, is really making sure that we're not over allocating, because the one thing that we don't want to do and that we've tried to avoid with this client, because when you first came in, we had frequency off the charts with only a couple of ads, pieces of content in there, and you're looking at 15, 20 different impressions from, people over a 30-day period, which is just ridiculous. And so we had to kind of pull that back a little bit and say, all right, let's get this back into a healthy, normal range, and then also diversify the content a bit. And so I was knowing myself there, but that's kind of the big initial piece of making sure that we've got the right type of budget allocated to each of the different campaigns.
Perfect. Okay, so you've just to sort of break that down. So you took the three audiences, or you broke the retargeting audience into three bits. It's 30, 60, 90.
Yeah.
So for this audience, what is the source? Is it just website visits, ad clicks on LinkedIn, all of those things? Did you break down the, let's say, website into different pieces? Like, were there any other segments as well?
Yeah, so what we did is, 100% website visits, right? So anyone that's coming to the websites as direct, organic, referral, you name it, all that traffic coming in there. People that are coming off for LinkedIn in this case, but there's Meta also involved, but for LinkedIn's company page, people that are actually visiting the company page. They had a founder and then their SME that posted quite a bit, and so we knew there was traffic getting into LinkedIn's company page, so we wanted to make sure we got that into the audience. Then we also did some image-based audiences as well, and so created some people that were actually engaging with the ads in the cold layer, and so we had a number of cold campaigns running, and those were the key campaigns really that ultimately drove a lot of the quality traffic into that retargeting campaign, plus, of course, what you see on the website. And so those are the big audiences. There were, of course, a lot of exclusions that we kind of added in there because there were other campaigns going on, so we wanted to avoid cannibalization between some of them. But those are the three big audiences that kind of drove everyone into that campaign. And then obviously there were breaks, right? And so in the 30 versus 90 versus 180, we're excluding out some of the people or those other audiences, right? So it's truly just the people from 0 days to 30 and then 30 to 90 and 90 to 180. That way you've got campaign specific where you can create a little bit of a journey or a path. Not to say that everyone knows it's complete bullshit that anyone's going to go from like one area to the next, right? But you want to create some variety and diversification across things. Otherwise, you're just going to hit them over and over and over again with, hey, do you want a demo? Do you want a demo? And here's our 32 pieces of social proof, So.
Love that. Let's actually get into the exclusions as well, right? So for exclusions, what do you usually exclude from these audiences? And in this case, what did you?
Yeah. Well, I think actually to take one step back, I think actually inclusions is the much better place to even start before that.
Okay.
Right. So you get your inclusions right. What we first did is basically used inclusions on the ICP criteria. Because everyone knows exclusionary, or maybe not everyone knows, but exclusionary criteria are the most restrictive. And so you can have situations where, for example, let's say that, you're the founder of Spear Growth, but at the same time, you're also part of a couple of different communities. And so if those communities are different sizes and you exclude them, we might exclude you completely from the retargeting layer. We don't necessarily want to do that because you still could be a really good fit because these days people have all sorts of jobs, right? They're part of communities, they're advisors at other companies, all sorts of things. And so much better to start with inclusions, get those solid. And then if you've got some other things like specific titles that are coming in, maybe you start to see things like you're not targeting salespeople, and this was the case for this company. They weren't targeting salespeople, so we added in a whole bunch of things related to account executive, BDR, SDR, etc., because these were probably likely people that were prospecting that account, and they were eating up impressions, so there was just no point to be retargeting them, things like that. Current customers was another one. We went ahead and just kind of excluded them. We had other campaigns running for acceleration and expansion, but this is not one of those instances where we wanted to do that in these campaigns. So it was purely all about net new acquisition for people that hadn't yet converted. So then the other thing, lastly, was obviously people that already had converted, right? If they're already in sales cycles, if they're already in the CRM, then we wanted to get those out of there as well. Again, those were also part of different types of other retargeting campaigns, just not the ones that we're talking about right now, because these were primarily focused on getting people that hadn't converted back to the website. So.
Love that. And then for your ICP criteria, I know we're getting super into it, but I think that's what people like on this podcast. So on the ICP criteria, do you only use things on the LinkedIn platform, or did you also sort of, let's say you build a list, upload that list, and then this is now your TAM and that's what you're using for inclusions? Or
in this case, we didn't. We have done that before. I mean, we've done some, target account lists where literally we just have the target account list as a conclusion in the retargeting audience. You're basically taking like the most active people from that and just making sure that you're only hitting those companies. In this case, they were okay with being a little bit broader. So it was really just based off of industries, titles, and then company size. Those are the kind of the three big ones. And so outside
interesting, you use industries.
What's that?
I think, and you've been able to use industries really well on LinkedIn as well, because I and a lot of other agency owners have a lot of, I think, trouble using this LinkedIn native industry targeting. So were there something specifics that you were able to include in this case?
Well, I think the key is you can't be too narrow about it, right? You have to have some level of broad structure to it too. Also, when you've got a target account list, you can got to get a preview of what some of those target industries look like. Because to your point, sometimes you may think you only want to go after software-related companies or software development, yet they're being categorized as another industry. So to your point, sometimes it's a pain in the butt to actually get the right industry mix. But if you've got a target account list or you've taken a look at your audience insights, you can quickly kind of have an understanding, an idea of ultimately, are these the right industries that we should be including? And so that's what we did ultimately. And ended up cutting a lot of just waste out of the campaigns that were just going into industries that were not things they could ever really serve. And so you got to you've got to review it as you do with anything within audience insights. But yeah. That's what I'd say there.
Love that. Okay, perfect. And then coming back to the media plan, right? So I think we have a good understanding of how you build the audiences. There are 3 audiences in total.
Yeah.
For the media plan, like, did it start with all 3 audiences having different messaging and different targeting, or did you have to start in a single group and then at what point did the audience evolve? Sorry. Essentially.
I mean, the audiences, are always kind of shifting, moving up and down. So initially when we're doing a media plan, back to your point about how we segmented budget is, you first just size the audience from the get-go. And so the client's asking, or whoever in-house is asking, hey, ultimately, how much we should be dedicating to some of these campaigns and how are you guys going to be splitting it up? And so first things first is let's get the audience sizes across all those different individual retargeting campaigns. We also had some where they were also geo-based. So these were global campaigns across both APAC, EMEA, and North America. And so we had a lot of different campaigns by geos, also some that were localized as well in different languages. And so when you've got this level of complexity, you need to start breaking down each of those different audience sizes. Also because there's different budget lines. And so there are specific budget lines for specific products and for specific geos. And so those you segmented out accordingly to make sure that we stay in budget. That's just based off the P&L. That's not like an ad thing. And so once we aligned with that, then it was like, okay, great. How are we going to then narrow that budget down? And that goes back to what we were talking about before. So you've got audience size, historical CPM, you've got ideal frequency. And then in general, in retargeting, you're going to reach usually about 70 to 80% of that audience just because they're the most active. And so then you can get to a number where you can say, hey, great, here's where I should estimate. And so to your point, how does that evolve over time? Well, clearly we're going to have to make decisions on, do we reallocate a little bit more budget to the 30-day layer versus the 90 versus this geo versus that? And so what we'll do is essentially every 30-day period or so, we'll take a look at what things look like and pull that in automatically via API into a spreadsheet. This helps us understand real quick, okay, ultimately, where are we right now today? What's frequency look like over the last 30 days? How much does historical CPM change? Do we need to allocate any new budget to that? And so if we do, we'll make those changes usually on a 30-day roll. And occasionally we might do that, a few times during the middle of the month if we're ever under or overspending, because sometimes that happens. But we've got some budget pacing tools that kind of help us give little automated alerts around that. So.
Perfect. Okay. I think that helps. Is there anything else about budgeting? And because I really I'm really excited about the messaging bit. We had a great conversation just before this. I want to understand that. But in the audiences and budgeting, is there something that I should have asked that we didn't quite get to?
I think we about covered it. I mean, I think we talked about the product lines. I've got 2 different product lines, 3 different geos, and then 3 different time segments. So it's a lot of different campaigns right there. Again, most of those countries all bundled in EMEA, so we didn't do anything segmented down by like Spain, France, or anything like that. That'd be crazy. But segmented at least based on those regions. So no, that's pretty much it. Try to keep things obviously not too complex, right? Because complex count is hard to manage. So.
Love that. Okay, great. So my favorite segment of this, let's get into the messaging bit, right? So. Before you just talk about, hey, what was the message? Can you just talk about your philosophy behind, what should be said in retargeting before we get into what exactly do you say and why, what should retargeting do? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think you first have to think like, how do they even get into the retargeting layer? And so we talked about the audiences. So they can get there by just visiting the website one time. They can get there by engaging with an ad one time. And so a lot of times these people aren't really ready to move forward immediately. And so I think commonly everyone thinks of retargeting as the conversion layer, the place where they're going to convert traffic right now. And that is true. You're clearly going to have most of your conversions come from that layer, obviously, because it's a last touch type of, model. But the big thing is treating that really as a nurture layer to say, hey, you may not be in market right now. You may have just been on the website looking at pricing or looking at the product. Try to get some more information about it, maybe building a business case internally. And so our job is really to map out the different buyer journey questions that happen along that. And so there might be questions like, do they integrate with my tech stack? What's the pricing? Does it align with my budget? What does it actually do and how does it work? I forgot, right? Because many people, because of the forgetting curve, just forget things after they see them, right? I mean, you can barely remember what, a president said or a prime minister said or someone that's very famous or important literally the day after they said it. So the chances that they're going to remember your B2B SaaS brand and your specific content the next couple of days after is very hard to imagine. And so that's the way that you kind of need to think about retargeting in the way we did for this client or really any client we work with. And so it's about saying, okay, great, we know that these people still aren't quite ready. They may not be in market yet. So we need to nurture them and go deeper. And so back to your point on messaging, it's about really saying, okay, now that we know that they've at least had some exposure, they must at least at a high level know the category we operate in because they've at least seen our ads or they've been to our website. So then the job is to say, okay, well, how do we get deeper into some of the use cases? How do we show them and align with where they are today? For example, with them, we went into basically what we call a pain points tab and created out all the different current states that the personas that we were targeting are. And so the current state was X. And so our goal was to create content and messaging around helping them understand what it looked like to go from current state X to future state Y. and give them very specific examples. We're not talking about like broad benefit statements like, save 50% time or increase 70% revenue with this company. We're talking about getting very specific on capabilities. So like an example with Clearbit, because I can't mention the company's name, would be like firmographic targeting on Facebook. Very specific, a very specific job that someone's looking to do. And then going into that and actually showing them what it looks like to do firmographic targeting on Facebook and how easy it is. So I'll stop myself there, let you ask me the question, but yeah, that's kind of the philosophy, the way that we think about retargeting.
Perfect. And then, so we just for context, we use very similar. We have a pain point first messaging framework that we use for most of our LinkedIn ads, if not all. There's a lot of pain points. There's a lot of current and future states as you start getting specific into it, getting into specifics. How do you pick and prioritize, or since we understand the audience, we just ask the client that, hey, let's just go with what you think people would like, and then just test it out.
Right. It's such a good question. I was just literally chatting with another client about this the other day, and the thing that's interesting about this is that every SaaS product has like 100 different features, right, or however many, and you're ultimately really coming to the product for really a handful of things. It might just be 10 to 50% of the product that you really want to use. Yeah. The other 80, 75 or whatever it is the extra stuff. It's like the nice to have when you get there, and it still has an influence, but it's really like these 3 or 4 things. And so what we always say before we even do anything, and before we look at ad data, before we look at CRM data, is we really just ask the in-house marketer to get info from sales and try to understand when people get on demos, what are the questions that they're asking? What are the things they're looking to get deeper in? And what are the problems they're talking about constantly? Because I was in sales before. Every product I sold in SaaS, there were always a handful of problems that always came up. They were the same ones over and over again. And so what we really want to do is we want to connect the dots to the biggest pain points, not just the stuff that's nice to have, but the stuff that they're already thinking about. And so the sales team hears this stuff literally all the time. And so much so that they know exactly what to say in those situations because they're on demos all the time. And so that's the place to really start. So once you nail that and you say, okay, great. So we got a lot of information from our in-house marketer, this client. They give us tons of really, really great data. So that actually tailored our ad strategy to the specific pain points that we actually ran that campaign.
I love that. And I think this has become a recurring theme. So whenever I think interview a non-agency guest, it's usually, I think this doesn't come up, but every single time I've interviewed anyone that runs an agency, works in an agency, we all like asking the sales team and not the marketing team. Even the marketing team is the team that uses it.
Totally.
Because this generally, I know this, the listeners are all marketers, but hey, sales team knows.
Yeah, the sales team knows. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, if they've got Gong or some recording software, I mean, marketing could theoretically go do that. But I mean, when you're in the front lines, you're talking to customers every day. Because marketers just, in the reality, just aren't doing that. Partly because it's just hard to be on all the calls, right? Marketers have a whole bunch of things to do. Can't realistically be on all of them, but when you're on the sales side, you can. And so you're just seeing the same things, the same patterns over and over again. And so when you do, it just becomes kind of easy, right? And so we've heard, for example, things like at Omni Lab, specific pain points that people talk about with other agencies or with other people. And so we know the things that come up all the time. It's the same stuff like clockwork. And so I think once you identify those things, it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, great. These are the things you really need to nail in that layer that are really going to be the unlock. The other stuff, those other features, the sales team is going to talk about those at some point in time about the demo. And those would be like the check the box type of things that they need because some of their boss or some of their department head actually wants those, but they're not the real thing that gets the deal done and gets them to come inbound.
I completely agree. And I love the point that you made that, hey, only 10% of product is the reason why people buy. In practice, if you had to use it apart from just asking sales questions, is there anything else that you do? And you may not. I'm just curious to myself and asking for myself at this point. How do you use that? Yeah, apart from just asking sales, hey, what do people ask? Is there any other way to use that? I asked the marketing team this question in a certain way and it helps, or that framing is, I think, very important or very useful. I haven't used that specific framing before, so I'm just asking you that, hey, how do you? Is there any other way than just asking sales that you also use that framing?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's other ways. I mean, so that's one way, right? You get sales, and then what we do is we tiered the pain points by various tier structures, like tier 1, 2, 3, et cetera, which gives us some indication. And so there's that way. Then there's ultimately getting data within either deal data. A lot of times there's written down, there's notes and all sorts of things like that to give us some information on ultimately what things are resonating better than others. Then there's ad data, right? And so you can clearly just run multiple different types of pain point ads, multiple different types of capability ads, and based on engagement rate, CTR, et cetera, you can make some type of inferences to get some direction on, okay, cool. Looks like no one cares at all about this specific thing. Great. Let's not talk about that anymore and let's move over here. And so you can do that. I really always prefer to start on the sales side because it's a way to kind of like skip the line. Most people would, on the paid side, would always just dive into, let's test it. Let's see, right? And you should, but when you've got a good data stream that's already coming in qualitatively, I find that's a lot more valuable versus wasting money on testing over the 30, 60, 90 days trying to figure out what it is when someone already over there knows. But yeah, you can totally use ad data. And we do that in the cold layer too, right? And so we'll run point types of messages or capabilities to ultimately then focus on one. But a lot of times the companies we're working with, they're mature enough. And so they've got the data. They already know what it is. A good example of this from another company unrelated to this success story is Clearbit. And so I knew their head of demand gen really well, and they've got now probably more products than this, but at the time they had like 5 core products. They spent almost their entire marketing budget just marketing 2. The rest of the 3 they just completely left aside because the market really had a huge pain point around what these 2 products solved. The others were good like tertiary products that they would get into later, but they just used that as an upsell motion on the sales side or customer success side once they got them into the first 2. And so this is why it's like such an important learning. If you can nail that in the beginning, then it makes it a lot easier to to convert and nurture traffic in the retargeting layer.
No, yeah, I absolutely love that because I think taking those sales interviews or asking the sales the right questions is very important to actually get the answers you need. I think that's something that people underestimate. You cannot just ask sales, hey, what do people ask on sales calls, and you won't get the information you need. You need all the context that Jonathan just spoke about. You need to understand that context that you can just ask the follow-up question well or just frame the first question well enough to be able to ask that. I think that's very important.
Exactly. 100%.
And then also I think the point about it has to be extremely specific is important because a lot of companies, everyone messes this up, right? Every single person messes this up. So can you give I just don't want to skim over it because I'm just asking you to re-talk about the points that I thought were very important. So
sure.
can you give an example of something that you call that is less specific and then something that's much more specific? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but an example.
I don't have an exact ad headline I can give you, but I think an example of something, just use that same Clearbit example since it's the one client I can actually mention because this relates directly to this case study, is that firmographic targeting on Facebook would be a very specific headline. And the template we actually use, which is so interesting, is if you start with the words I want in front, and then you think about the things that the buyer wants to do, the jobs that they want to do, you can get some really great headlines and get specific about it. So like, I want firmographic targeting on Facebook. We all know as B2B marketers, it's not that easy natively to target people. And so that aligns with an exact want and specific. An example of like getting broad and clever might be like, increase, your efficiency on Facebook by 50%. Like how? What's the context? Why? Right. And so like, we're not really sure. And a lot of times too, like those benefit statements, as you probably know all too well, a lot of times they just aren't believable. Most people need the context before you actually can get to the point of realizing, oh yeah, my ad spend would be a lot more efficient if I used Clearbit to build my audiences out. So like, if that context is there, cool, it starts to work. But if it's not, then people just start to ignore this type of thing. And so like, we're always a huge proponent of being clear and specific first. And then if you can get clever then try to be clever. But I think most people just want to create these like really clever, vague ads because they see major companies like Salesforce and others that have these like crazy broad statements. And the reason they can get away with that is because they're Salesforce, they're, Amazon or whatever big company. And so like when you're not those companies, which is the majority of SaaS brands, you have no choice but to just get bloody specific, because that can cut through the noise a little bit easier than just a whole bunch of vague, clever statements where it's like, I still don't know what you do. It sounds pretty funny. It sounds great, but still not sure what you even do,
Yeah, I think the funniest example is something that that's divided a lot of people that I've shown this to. It's on we just redid our website. The homepage of our website, we were trying to be clever, or like just talk about the benefits and hey, we increase pipeline and we do this and that. And the headline that's there today says ads and SEO for B2B SaaS. And it says nothing else for anyone else. Right? It's just like, hey, like I always say this, and then a follow-up question is, hey, do you also do that? I mean, I just said what I do. Like, why are you asking me if I also do something else? But I think in agencies, that was the follow-up question. So I just answered the two questions I get.
Yeah, I love that example. It's a great one. I mean, there's another one, Cognism, I know if you go to their website, I think it's still the same headline, but it's something like, we give you B2B mobile phone numbers. It's something like that. There may be a few more words that I'm missing, but like that's exactly what they do. Great, thank you. They could have said something like, we have the most advanced data platform in the world, or something like that. Data platform? What do you mean? I mean, they are technically a data platform. They have data on B2B people with emails and all sorts of things, but when you just explicitly say what you do, it makes it so much easier. And also, of course, you can add in layers to that of like, all right, well, who is it for then now? And I don't know if you guys did that on your website, but are you for B2B SaaS clients? Are you for B2C? Are you for automotive? Who do you serve, right? Am I here in the right place? You want everyone to feel like they're in the right place when you're on your website. Oh, cool. They do B2B, they do SaaS, they do paid. I'm looking for these things, keyword. And then ultimately the differentiation, a lot of the other things will come through the rest of the website and of course in the sales calls. So.
Oh, yeah. I think I love that. Perfect. So I think, is there anything else in messaging that you think like discussing would be important? So we've discussed the audience and the messaging. I think we've gone deep enough in both of them. Is there we've already like maybe start with the results, or is there what I want to get into? So what do you look at for success metrics? Is it just that, hey, if good retargeting does, like it answers all of these questions, it will automatically work, bring in more conversions, and that's what I'm measuring? Or is it something else?
So we look at a couple of things. At the top line, like leading indicators, right? Like clearly you want high engagement rate and high CTR, typically. Now, not everyone's going to click. Everyone knows that there's an entire zero-click revolution that's happening on Google with AI insights and all sorts of other things that's happening. So more people are just not clicking and taking action on things. But that's the one indicators that we have to understand, like, hey, is what we're actually putting out there resonating at all, and is it getting people back to the website? Next thing clearly is conversions, clearly, but not just any conversions, like what type. And so we don't do a whole lot of gated promotion for most of our clients. In most cases, it's open and free. And so we're not looking necessarily at those types of conversions. We're looking at usually high intent demo requests that meet the ICP.
Yeah.
And so we can look at that data in the CRM and try to understand, hey, do they turn into MQL, SQL? We can also get that data back into LinkedIn too, or Meta, or really any channel at this point. And so that data is then really helpful to honestly understand, okay, great, we're getting conversions and our CPL zags, but is the quality there? And so sometimes it's hard because, demo request is one of the highest friction offers that you can have on a website, because you're asking for someone's time. And so, you may not have the volume of conversions in your retargeting campaigns, and we certainly didn't in this case, just didn't have huge quantities of attributable conversions in channel. What we saw is that there was a lot of influence when you started looking at all the accounts that had impressions over the course of that time that had touched our retargeting campaigns. And that's one of the ways that we actually knew that there was at least some correlation, not causal relationship, but some type of correlation to the fact of, all right, when we spend money on these accounts, with these types of inclusions, with these exclusions, etc., we start to see incremental increases. And so, yeah, that's what I say about that. I mean, there's a lot of different kind of avenues, but I'll let you kind of chime back.
Same. We do exactly the same. So I think one thing that we do, I think we found a trick to get to know which companies are engaging, which accounts are engaging with our ads, how much, but by week. So I know in which week what's happening, and I have a weekly report now that hey, in this week this company got to 10 engagement. This week this company got to only, last week they were only at 7. So once I have that, I can now set up an engagement threshold, and then with that engagement threshold, I can now send it. I can start conversations, and then what happens with when you start conversations is that now you can actually track another layer of hey, like did they even, when you try to start conversation, you get to know that hey, but they never heard about us. Like it's just, I think that's an interesting like realization. Oh, like maybe we need to do a lot more in this industry or for this audience. Like it's not like 10 engagement per company is not enough in the last 30 days. It has to be 20 in this industry. And I think that's been an interesting, I mean, you should definitely try that out. Just like getting, like looking at it on a weekly basis, getting sales to actually start conversations. That's been an interesting thing we've done. The net issue with our, or like the catch is that to start a conversation, you need to know who in the company, which you don't get to. So if you're selling to mid-market or SMBs, in our approach, yeah, sure, you can guess, right? As soon as you get to enterprise, we are almost forced to run lead gen. That we get to know in among these 50 people who is engaging, who is this, right? And then that's the con of our approach. But hey, like that's what
Well, I think it's teaches that. We run some lead gen too, right? Just depends on the client. I mean, if you need the data point and you really need to know who was the person engaging, then you have to go that direction. If you're more comfortable with a looser way, or I mean, there's also the world of going into our B2B world and Vector and other tools like that are at least doing personal profile de-anonymization, at least in the US for now, until they're shut down at some point in the future. But at any rate, some of those things do give you those insights, and so theoretically could get a Slack notification and follow up immediately with that account. So there are some things like that you can do. But to your point, if you don't use those tools or not comfortable with them for whatever reason, then you've got to rely on things like lead gen forums, and that could be not just gated content. That might be webinar registrations. That might be other types of events and things that you're hosting. And so those things are always going to be gated. There's no way around that. To know that, okay, cool, we're reaching the right audience. I'm seeing that the right types of people are coming in that are consuming our content. That's really great. And then maybe there's an approach that I can take that isn't just give me a demo or do you want a demo? It's, ultimately, hey, how could we engage in a content collaboration, or do you want to partner on a web together, or engaging around the content itself versus the typical good old-fashioned model of just sending SDRs after those people.
I love that. Okay, is there anything that I should have asked you but I didn't? I think we've covered everything.
I think we pretty much got it. The only thing I'd probably add to the whole thing is that, we had across all 3 layers, we didn't get across all the different types of content, we were running, but, the big ones were case studies, social proof, product marketing was a huge part of it that we talked about, right? So core capabilities, core pain points, use cases. And then we also had product tours as well, which was actually interesting. So they had a product tour on their website. I believe they used Novatic, I want to say, or Walnut, one of those tools. But anyway, they created a separate page just for that. And so we actually led a lot of the traffic and saw pretty good demos actually coming from that specific type of motion, where people would just get right into it and a specific use case, choose their journey, and then actually get an idea of actually how it works. And so we saw a lot of demos come through some of those tools. So that'd be the other thing to think about. And of course, all this content was kind of isolated across the different campaigns that we ran. 30-day was a little bit more so heavier, pushing them into a conversion place, product tours, demos, product marketing, etc. And then as you got further and further away, it went back to more top of funnel content, other types of content assets that gave a little more education around it. So maybe that's another episode to get into all the weeds.
That's very interesting. So you start with bottom of the funnel and then you go up to top instead of, I've heard a lot of people try to do it the other way around. But I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason, the logic for us, and again, it's impossible to know exactly where anyone is, right? There's going to be some people that maybe are further away that are more in market than others. But the reality is that if they haven't engaged with your 30-day layer or your 90-day layer and they're already moving in, that means they're not engaged. And so for whatever reason, they're not in market, they're not ready to move forward in a demo. And so we have to stop saying the same types of things and kind of roll back to just like good content, good messaging, good helpful templates, things like that. And so that's the way that we kind of do it, is when they have the most interest, where they're the most top of mind, we just run the website. We want to make sure we go a little bit deeper in the product and make sure we give them some type of offer to bite on. And maybe it's not just get a demo, maybe it's something more specific. Mm-hmm. But then after that, then you've got to move in and say, okay, they're clearly not ready. They're not in market, and that's okay. Not everyone is. And so let's just go ahead and continue nurturing them with other content. So that's the logic.
I love that. I completely agree. I'll just end this episode with a quick failure story of mine because I think it's hilarious. So back when I was doing my full-time role before this, I had the bright idea, I was young, right, that let me take all the content. This was a unicorn B2B SaaS company in the fintech space. Let me take all the content, categorize it along I made a 5-step buyer journey, and then I categorized every page on the website, or tried to categorize almost every page on a 10,000 page website into different stages in the buying journey, and then I tried to push people from one stage to the other. It was a massive project. I ran it. It worked worse than just running bottom of the funnel content. I spent a month of my life on that. And a lot of other people. I'm so sorry for everyone who did that, but that was a great learning opportunity. It clearly, I think it just adds to what you just said. Start with bottom of the funnel, then go to top. Don't make the mistake I made.
Exactly. Well, I think, don't overthink it, right? I mean, you think about the organic content. One last example here. I know you said you had Adam Robinson on before, but you think about him, right? I mean, he's got all sorts of different types of content that he's sharing. He's not, programmatically thinking about where you are in the journey. And so we can do that as advertisers because you can bucket people. But the reality is people get a lot of value from the content that he puts out, or that I put out, or maybe that you put out, et cetera, and others put out in the world. It's not well, now it's time to do middle of the funnel content because you already saw my top of funnel stuff. I mean, there's still value across all these things. And so I think it's just about, mixing up the content, not getting too granular. We're trying to your point, go through these crazy waterfalls that, are hard to honestly even build and facilitate, and make sure you've got the right content layer when, and refreshing all that stuff, and just say, hey, cool, we're going to create good content. We're going to make sure it always has a dotted line back to our product. We're going to make sure our POV and our narrative run through all that content, and we're going to get it out there into the space. And people are going to understand what we do, how we do it, and over time, when they're ready and they have a pressing need that we can ultimately solve, they're going to hopefully think of us.
Got it. Yeah, perfect.
So,
cool. Thank you so much for doing this, Jonathan. This was actually great. I love digging deep into things that people do. But it's just I think people don't understand the level of expertise required to do something as simple as running retargeting. And that's why I love these podcast episodes. Thank you so much for doing this again. Yeah.
Of course, man. Yeah, thanks for having me.
It was great having you on. Thanks, Jonathan.
All right, man. I'll see you.
Thank you for listening to the TLDR podcast. In case you're wondering, Spear Growth is a marketing agency. We help B2B SaaS companies like yourself with ads and SEO. Check out our website at speargrowth.com. That is SPEARGROWTH.com. Just like this, every episode starts with a 1-minute summary of what we discuss. Pick the next episode to listen to based on what you can implement right away. And after you implement any of these tactics and see an impact, we'd appreciate you drop us a note on podcast@speargrowth.com.